it came as no surprise really to myself that Chrystia Freeland was appointed Canada's foreign minister. She's obviously a rising star in the Liberal Party. And at least about a year ago, I predicted that she was going to move on to bigger and better things, and maybe even down the road would have a stab at becoming leader of the Liberal Party. So that's not surprising. She also is somebody who is eminently qualified for the job, regardless of your political views. Not every foreign minister in any country is an expert on international relations, diplomacy, on who knows Canada's two major, as it were, trading and conflictual countries, Russia and the US, and therefore somebody who brings not only self-confidence, but also gravitas and intellectual scrutiny to the job. It's interesting for me personally because the first time I met Chrystia Freeland was probably about 1989. I don't remember exactly the year. Around that time, I was director of the then London-based Ukrainian press agency. We published stuff in English, press releases and such like. I don't know why Chrystia came to our offices. She may have been doing some studies in Britain, but she certainly was on her way to Soviet Ukraine and was happy to take a suitcase of books, which of course were illegal. They were anti-Soviet books, they were diaspora books, and she had no compulsion, she had no fear in her in taking those books. Obviously already a very self-confident person, and we're talking about in the late 1980s. The next time I saw her was after moving to Canada in 2001, when she was working in a senior position in the Globe and Mail. And then, ironically, about a decade or 12 years later, when she became my MP for my district of Toronto, where I lived, which was extremely ironic in view of the way I had originally met her and of my knowledge of her publications and speaking. I also, I think, at least twice on a panel with her at the Mundt Center discussing Ukrainian-Russian crisis issues and such like. Will Chrystia have an impact? Well, she's very self-confident. Certainly she will represent Canada, I think, in a very patriotic and professional manner. But, she will have to deal with many obstacles which exist in Canada, regardless of who is in power. And in this respect, it's rather unusual, therefore, for Ukrainians in Canada who have tended to be, say, supporters of the Conservative Party, to not very much like the fact she's been appointed. Because in reality, there's not that much difference between how the Conservatives and Liberals approach Canadian policy towards Ukraine. There are many Ukrainians in Canada who are Conservative Party supporters who were very unhappy with Prime Minister Harper's unwillingness to be more robust in providing support for Ukraine, particularly in the issue of sending military equipment. And many Ukrainian Canadian Conservatives would regard Prime Minister Harper as all talk, no action. So the idea that somehow this is a bad step that Chrystia Freeland has been appointed foreign minister is, I think, rather a mistaken view. Because although an individual can have influence and impact, and they certainly can do so if they have those kind of qualifications that Chrystia Freeland has, at the same time, you are going to face certain questions which will face any government that comes to power in Canada. And these are a number of issues. Firstly, the issue of Canada's withdrawal from the international stage. This didn't begin under the Liberals, under Trudeau, going on for 2 to 3 decades. And in this respect, why should the Liberals be that much different from what it was under Prime Minister Harper? In fact, defense spending under Prime Minister Harper didn't really go up. It actually went down a bit. The fact that Canada is in the bottom 5 of NATO's 28 members in terms of defense spending as a percentage of GDP is not a problem for the Liberals. It's a general Canadian question that has been decided at the elite level back 2 decades ago or so. And this has not been an issue until now. Now we have a new US president in power this week, and he has made it into an issue. Donald Trump has very publicly said we should no longer, i.e. the US should no longer support freeloaders, people who don't abide by the requirements that institutions have for their members. NATO has long required its members to spend 2% of GDP on the military. As of today, about only 5 out of 28 members of NATO do so. United States, Britain, Estonia, ironically, much poorer than Canada, Poland, and, if I'm not mistaken, probably France. So there are many countries now stepping up their military spending, particularly in the Baltic states, Lithuania and Latvia, because of the Russian threat. But I somehow don't think that either the Conservatives or the Liberals would be happy to double Canadian military spending very quickly, because that would require taking money from other government programs. Regardless of who would be Canadian Foreign Minister, it's unfair to sort of criticize Chrystia Freeland just because you happen to be a Conservative Party voter. There are going to be realities facing anybody who is in power in Canada, whether they're Conservatives or Liberals, and whether whoever is going to be the Foreign Minister and indeed Defence Minister of Canada. The reality is that Canada has withdrawn largely from the international stage 2 to 3 decades ago. Its military spending is a reflection of that. Canadian military spending is in the bottom 5 of NATO's 28 members. This wasn't really an issue until now, because Donald Trump, the person who will become US president this week, has made it into an issue. He sees everything as a business transaction, and therefore he has raised the question of why should America help to freeload countries who don't pay their way. Canada is not paying its way. It spends very little on defense spending. It doesn't feel, of course, it lives in a neighborhood where it requires large amounts of defense spending. The Russians are not about to invade its Arctic territories or the Yukon. But Trump is raising these issues, and it's an issue for NATO in general as well as Canada, because only 5 of NATO's 28 members spend 2% of their GDP on defense spending. Now, whether the Liberals or Conservatives were in power wouldn't really make a difference. I just somehow don't believe that either of those political parties would somehow double military spending overnight to satisfy Donald Trump. That would cause a tremendous headache for any government and would take away financial assets, financial resources from other government programs. So that's going to be an issue that the foreign minister and defense minister under the Liberals is going to have to take care of. And they're dealing with a very prickly new president. And it's going to make Canadians very nostalgic for somebody they poked fun at, George Bush, who looks like an intellectual aristocrat now compared to Donald Trump. A second question that Chrystia is going to be dealing with is something that came under her previous position as Minister of Trade, and that's, of course, the question of NAFTA. Canadians obviously are very interconnected with the United States. Most Canadians live within 100 kilometers of the US border. Many cross over the border. 80% of Canadian trade is with the US, and therefore if Trump is serious, and with Trump we never know if he's serious, about renegotiating or dropping NAFTA, he's called NAFTA the worst trade deal in history, then that would be a tremendous blow to Canadian business, some of which I know from my personal friends, some of which are still not recovered from the 2008 crash, because some of the American business that they were getting up until 2008 is now going elsewhere. So Chrystia Freeland is going to be having to deal with those two big issues, which are issues that have been raised by the new or forthcoming US president. Also, it's unfair to be critical if you're a Conservative Party voter of Chrystia, because the reality is there isn't that much difference in approach between the Conservatives and Liberals towards Ukraine. Both provide support in a variety of ways, but neither political party has considered the idea of sending military equipment to Ukraine. And I know for a fact that many of my Ukrainian Canadian Conservative friends were not very happy at Prime Minister Harper for not taking that step. And they believed he was very much all talk, no action. So in that sense, I don't see how the Liberals and Conservatives are going to be that different on that key issue. In effect, Canadians, like maybe the British and the Poles, would always want to wait until the Americans took the first step in the sending of military equipment, and then they would probably follow. And that seems extremely unlikely at the moment under Donald Trump. Where Chrystia could make a major difference, if we're looking ahead this year is going to be a critical year for Ukraine. I don't believe that US and Russia will have a breakthrough in their relations. I think the odds on that will fail, as it failed under George Bush and under Barack Obama. There are simply too many differences between Russia and the US, plus Russia believes it's never done anything wrong. So you can't really have a reset of that. But during the meantime, when America might be, or Donald Trump will be trying to do a deal with Putin, that's when it could be dangerous. And this is where I think Canada, and in particular its new foreign minister, could play a major role in standing up for Ukrainian interests. And here we're talking about opposition to any kind of new Yalta agreement, which is what Putin wants, which would place Ukraine, Georgia, and some other post-Soviet countries within Russia's sphere of influence. This is what Russia is seeking from Washington. It's seeking a new carve-up of the region and a recognition that these countries, like Ukraine, belong within its legitimate sphere of influence. Russian President Dmitry Medvedev called Russia's privileged zone of interest. If Putin goes in that direction, that's something that one would hope would be an area that Chrystia Freeland would stand up for Ukraine as being a long-time ally and a country of interest to 1.5 million Canadians of Ukrainian descent. The other area which I think will be important will be areas of joint strategic dialogue between Canada and the European Union. If there was under Bush a parting of ways between the US and Canada, particularly over Iraq, this was the first time that Canada didn't agree with the US over the invasion of Iraq. Remember how that played out at the time. In the end, Canada was very right about not going into Iraq. But what we are going to be seeing down the road here is that Canada will be increasingly on the same side as Europe in its battle to survive the onslaught from, on the one hand, Putin's desire to smash and destroy the EU and NATO, and President Trump's support for populist nationalism and support for Britain's Brexit from the European Union. And here Canada is is not on the side of the populist nationalists or the Putinist imperialists in trying to destroy the EU. Canada is on the side of the EU, and this is something that's important to Ukraine, and it will be important to Canada as well. And here's an area that I think Chrystia Freeland is very eminently able to have a strong influence as the Foreign Minister of Canada, because she understands the issues and because she understands the crucial importance of Canada's strategic alliance with important democratic institutions such as the European Union. Donald Trump is in a different camp here. He supports Brexit. He supports the populist nationalists who want to destroy the European Union. And hence here, I think Canada's going to, and therefore the Foreign Ministry of Canada is going to have to tread a very difficult line between trying to maintain good relations with the US, but at the same time having a very different view of Canadian, Ukrainian and Canadian European Union relations. I wish her good luck. She will certainly need it, and I think it would be wrong for Canadians because of petty political reasons, because they don't happen to be members of the Liberal Party, in not trying to support somebody who is both a Canadian patriot and also a patriot of Ukraine. Thank you very much.